in whatever way is comfortable to you in your tradition, in your practice. That might be noticing your breath or feeling the physicality of your body. And just resting in your own energetic center and your presence for this moment. And take a moment to sense the edge of your body, where your skin meets the air, where your feet meet the floor, where your body meets the seat you're sitting on. And just feel the edge of the physicalness of who you are. And now soften that edge, allowing it to be soft and merging with the air around you and with the chair and in the room. And as you expand this sense of who you are, expand your connection to those who are on this call. And to the MSR community, and to other communities that you're a part of, particularly those that support your personal and spiritual development, feeling your connection, your interconnection, and the importance of all of these connections. And as you expand your sense of connection, expand it in time to your sense of the past and your sense of the future, being interconnected in this present moment. In this expanded sense of connection, stay in this expansion as you open your eyes gently and get ready to join this wonderful conversation being held in sacred space by Chris Laszlo as we talk about prospective theorizing. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn it over to Chris Laszlo now. Chris is a member of the Flamekeepers Committee in MSR. He is also chair-elect of MSR and has become a really good friend and colleague as we explore the integration of management, spirituality, religion, quantum science, quantum physics, leadership, and changing the world in ways that allow for flourishing and many, many other things. Chris, thank you so much for being willing to champion this topic tonight and today. And well, it's tonight in some places, isn't it, Catherine? And Adi and several others on this call. So we welcome you all. And Chris, the Zoom room is yours.
Thank you so much, Judy, and a very warm welcome to all of you. It's really such a pleasure to see so many of you and such really wonderful, brilliant scholars on this call. I really look forward to this. I see this as a working session, and I'm just delighted with having this kind of participation. I want to say a special thank you to Judy and to the MSR Flamekeepers, many of whom are here, for allowing me to share my research, which, by the way, is still very much in progress. So I invite you to contribute to the conversation today in that spirit. This is not a sort of a finished product, but rather something that is in construction. I also want to thank Paul Schmidt, who is helping to manage the process. and the breakouts and so on. So let me start by declaring a not unambitious goal, if I may say it like this. So I really feel that this is an opportunity to shape this work into seminal research that can contribute to MSR thought leadership in the years ahead. And the bigger goal, and many of you have urged or also working on this, is to try to influence the academy itself, how MSR may be actually becoming a lead interest group and division shortly to be one of the drivers of a more relevant form of scholarship in our field. Okay, so for this session, there are 3 parts. In each one, I'm going to make a short presentation followed by discussion breakout. And when you come back from the breakouts, Paul will probably remind you as well, but my request is that you put your ideas into the chat box, because everyone has the opportunity to save the chat text, as you know, directly to your computers. And this will be one way for you to keep a record of the ideas that will come, hopefully productively come out of our conversations here in this session. Okay, does that work? Okay, so allow me to share my screen. So welcome again to this topic, perspective theorizing through a quantum lens. By the way, this building here is the building at Case Western Reserve University, the Weatherhead School of Management, a Frank Gehry building, which looks beautiful but doesn't always work very well. Can you, I think, Paul, would you check again on, I think there may be 1 or 2 who are, I'm hearing echoing.
Got it, Chris.
Okay, thanks much. Okay, so let's dive right in. So what is perspective? Why is this important? Okay, well, first of all, perspection at its simplest level refers to the mental representation and evaluation of possible futures. Now, in the context of theory building, it's based on 2 radical assumptions, okay? 2 assumptions. The first is that human behaviors at the individual, organizational, and system level are driven by grounded imagination, ideas, and intentions about the future. Again, there's a rich body of work, of which Seligman probably is one of the lead scholars on this, but many others also that have been pointing to this human behavior driven by our images, beliefs, intentions about the future. The second is that theorizing itself is formed in and by the futures we envision. What does this mean? It means that the act of observing, the questions that we ask, and the sensing and intuiting of what is emerging in the future is an important role of what the scholar does. And it gives the scholar agency to not just be sort of discovering what is, but creating what could be. Part of this is, as you can see on the slide here, part of this is an effort to shift research towards what has been called generative scholarship. I think this is a term that Kenneth Gergen first used in an article in 1978, and many have used it since, to point to the need for scholarship that is more relevant, has greater social impact, and is better able to address the growing number of complex challenges that management scholars face today. And I don't need to remind you what they are. We, just say artificial intelligence and pandemics and climate change and social equity, and that's the beginning of just a very long list. So why do we need something different now? Well, let me suggest that we think about this first in terms of 2 limitations of academy theory building. So for those of you who are PhD students or scholars who are working right now in theory building, I want you to consider these, that Originality and utility are the two primary criteria that top-tier journals use to judge the value of theoretical contributions. Originality and utility. And we see this, Corley and Joya, 2011, Hambrick, 1994, and others have continually pointed to this. But what we've seen also is a fairly sustained criticism that originality has in fact tended to mean the ability to incrementally improve existing knowledge rather than coming up with authentically new ideas, and that utility has tended to be scientific, not practical, defined by academic peers and journal editors rather than practitioners. So again, these limitations are not new, but there is a sense that they're worsening and growing. And one source of commentary on this, many of you may know him, is Andy Hoffman at the University of Michigan. I don't know if Sandra Waddock is on this webinar. I can't see all of the. Sandra, are you there? I just wanted to say that Sandra will be interviewing Andy Hoffman, not this Friday, but a week from this Friday, and I urge you to attend that. It's at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, April 30th. So the concrete manifestation, okay, thank you. The concrete manifestation of this inwardly turned focus, as one scholar put it, is an insularity that registers not the needs of truth, but academic empire building. An insularity in the academy that registers not the needs of truth, but academic empire building. That's from Jacobi 2000. So that's the situation. There's a long-standing sense that the academy is losing relevance. And I want to give you now 3 reasons why we want to now start looking at new foundations for theorizing, a different kind of theorizing. So there are 3 reasons to change, and there may be more, but these are the 3 primary reasons that I see. First, there's very little evidence that the academy has paid any attention to these limitations of originality being only incremental and utility being only what's defined by journal editors and the Academy of Management peers. So you can find, if any of you are interested, I can send you the references to studies that have discussed this lack of evidence. That's the first reason to change. The second is membership in the academy has stagnated, as many of you know. The academy has had about 18,000 members for the last 10 years, and it fell to 16,000 in 2020, of course, largely because of the pandemic, but it does put into question whether the what the future is of the academy as the premier professional association for scholars going forward. And the third reason to change is simply the growing level of complexity in management challenges. And I think we're all convinced of that. I'm not going to spend really any time on that. I think we can all, in our minds, have a list of challenges at the individual, at the organizational, and at the systems level. Now, in my own work, I didn't realize I was doing it, but if I think about my 5 books, starting in 2003, I was actually engaged in a kind of prospection or prospective theorizing in every instance, because in 2003, with the Sustainable Company, I was already sort of anticipating or wanting to influence a different role for business and society. And initially, it was trying to demonstrate how paying attention to environmental and social factors could actually be, could help companies be more successful with their customers and shareholders. And then defining sustainable value, the best practices in terms of embedding sustainability, the shift to making a positive impact. And then in 2019, I turned my attention to what I think is the next future chapter in business as a force for good, or as David Cooperrider likes to call it, business as an agent of world benefit. It's really about working at the level of the individual, transforming who people are being, not just what they're doing. So this was just to give you, my own personal sense and experience of power perspective theorizing. Now, especially for you scholars, I hope that this will be something that will allow you the deepest dive into exactly what do we mean by perspective theorizing. So you see on the left y-axis, you see time. It says really the arrow of time, where projective perspection is extending the present into the future, and what I call envisioned perspection is reversing the causality. The future is what pulls the present to it, or the future is what drives the future T1 is what drives T0. And on the x-axis, you see the source of perspection, which in the literature you can clearly see is viewed as either originating in the brain or in some sort of collective relational way. Most of the academy, most of the journal articles that have addressed perspection have limited themselves to this bottom left-hand category. This is the safe conventional science view, that weak signal processing, meaning that we look for weak signals about what may be happening in the future, planning, affective forecasting, and simulation about possible futures are all ways that are seen as extending from the past into the future to anticipate or to simulate likely futures. And there's an enormous amount of work done on how it happens, and it's all about the brain. It's about brain regions such as the medial temporal lobes, the midline prefrontal cortex, the cingulate cortex that are engaged in this intertemporal analysis. And it's again, it's very limited in scope because a lot of the psychologists and scientists, neuroscientists that have studied perspection in this quadrant here are using it chiefly to think about perspection as an adaptive function for biological survival. So to be able to minimize errors in how we think about the future to increase our chances of survival. And secondly, for predicting what they call the hedonic consequences of likely future experiences. Okay, perhaps a lot of jargon, but you get the point. Now, there has been a growth in interest in collective perspection, how thinking about the future, even in a projective way, where we extend the present into the future, is really based on relational, future-oriented research, collaboration, perhaps also notions of collective intelligence. But fundamentally, it remains the projective version. Now, it gets more interesting when we think about the types of perspection in the top row. So envisioned perspection, remember, reverses the direction of causality. The future now is where we are grounding our theorizing, and it's shaping what we do in the present. That might include prescience, foresight, imagination, dreaming, simulation that's embedded in larger narratives. In the upper left, it remains brain-focused, and there's a lot of neuroscience that continues to look at how human beings do engage in intertemporal thinking or thinking about the future, a rich literature in that. But of course, what's most interesting, what I'm going to focus on in this webinar is in this upper right-hand quadrant, which is envisioned perspection, thinking from the future at a collective level. And so here we bring in sensing, presencing, intuiting, which I think many of you will recognize are, are capabilities or scholarly skills that the academy is not comfortable with. And it is all in service of future forming, collaborative construction of a better world. So even more speculatively, as we start thinking about the quantum world, such creative perspective theorizing in the upper right-hand quadrant might be sourced in a universal consciousness or a quantum field of energy and information that we can tap into if we know how. I want to suggest that, in fact, we, humanity and science as a whole, is on the lip of a paradigm change where we are starting to see the world in quantum terms that would allow this notion of a collective intelligence, not just metaphorically, but actually being a field of energy and information that we may be able to tap into. So, okay, so this is my last slide, and then, I'm almost finished here, and we'll go into the breakout groups. So this is how we might bring it all together to think about the theory building process. The theory building process for all of us and in the academy starts typically with a divergent phase where the scholar is asking questions, developing seed topics, collecting data, engaged in discovery and sense making to answer the question, what am I passionate about? Then the second phase typically is convergent, where the scholar is engaged in choosing boundaries and analyzing data, testing hypotheses, and then assessing these two criteria of originality and utility to have a clear sense of research goal. Introducing perspective theorizing introduces another category, which again I want to call here envisioning, where we use abductive logic and sensing, presencing, and intuiting to have ideas about a theory or to build a theory that is shaped by a desired future. And we're using sensing, presencing, and intuiting that remains grounded in data that we collect in the present. So this is not some sort of fantasy, otherwise it wouldn't be a scholarly undertaking. But it accepts the idea that we can, through our images and dreams and imaginations about the future, we can come to theoretical or to create theories and to come to insights that are far more powerful than simply based on analyzing anomalies in the past and present. And part of this is also assessing moral meaning and impact and the collaborative constructionism that is involved in working together with collective intelligence to ask, what future am I shaping? And that's not a question that scholars typically ask. And so then we get to the solutioning phase, which is pretty much the one we're all used to, where we start building a narrative for our theory or for our paper with data validation, simplicity and elegance, aesthetic illumination, and then empirical and normative findings. Okay, thank you for your message, Claudia. So now I want to just finish. This is before the breakout groups. I want to finish with this question for you. Who are you writing for? When you're engaged in theorizing of any kind, are you writing for yourself? Are you writing for the academy, for journal editors, journal reviewers? Are you peers? Or are you writing for the people and organizations and systems you study? Or are you writing for the larger world, the community, the ecology, and future generations? And clearly, I don't want to suggest that it's one or the other, or even a subset. You can absolutely writing for all, but where is your primary attention? So all of this was meant to get the thought process going and to challenge our thinking. And I hope you found that provocative, because that was the goal, to get you to feel a little challenged with this. And now we have 3 questions in the breakout groups. And Paul, are you able to put them into breakout groups? It would be for 10 minutes, yes. Paul also has put in the questions here. And I can tell you, I'm hugely looking forward to, and I hope you're looking forward to seeing what the collective answers are from the conversation that follows. So Paul, what do we do?
Paul, you're on mute, I believe.
So for those who haven't noticed, the 3 breakout groups are in the chat, the titles.
Okay. Paul, you're still on mute. We're not able to hear you.
I'm so sorry. There you go. I will send you off into breakouts. I'll provide prompts with about 3 minutes to go. So you can wrap things up and we'll see you back in 10 minutes.
The ideas in there. Many thanks. Paul, is there anything that you wanted to say, or?
No, I think we're good. You did want people muted coming back, correctly?
Well, we need to go on, and we don't have time to do
Correct.
verbal readouts.
Just making sure.
Just putting it into the chat. So please continue to put your. I will just give you another minute to put your ideas into the chat. All right, Bill, I like that. I devoted my career to being visionary, and then lots of emphasis. And yes, you know, Otto Scharmer and not only his theory new work, but his work on emergent complexity with Kaufer in 2010 is very relevant to this.
Chris, I'm sorry, I messed up on the computer. I'm a visionary transformational person in the world of education. And I have encountered nothing but paradigmatic entrenchment and resistance in that world in the 50 years of my career. I'm new to this group altogether, and I'm here to learn. So thank you.
Well, Bill, I feel encouraged that we are joining forces.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so if you can put that on, I think what I'll do is go on. And Paul, is there anything that you can see that I need to attend to before going on?
Oh, I think you're good, Chris. Carry on.
All right, then. So what I want to do now is give you a very quick tour of the evolution of perspective theorizing, simply because it's so fascinating to see what's happened in the last 100 years. So it really starts with what I call stage one, where perspection is disallowed. What do I mean by perspection is disallowed? Well, there was a period in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s when psychologists, sociologists, economists, political scientists, and others really were taken by positivist science. In psychology, we saw the rise of behaviorism that led researchers to a micro-determinist upward causation of human behavior. I'm sorry if that sounds a bit jargony, but in short, what it means is that human behavior should be understood from below, in the sense that once we understand, how atoms function or how cells function, we can understand how organs function, and upwards all the way to the functioning of the brain. And in fact, the brain can be just understood as having reached a certain level of complexity where we get the kind of mind phenomena that we have, but it's all physical and based in parts. So in psychology terms, what that translated into was that human behavior is something that we can stimulate or manipulate based on past and present behaviors. So this is an example of operant conditioning from B.F. Skinner in the middle of the 20th century. This idea that enforcement can be either positive or negative. It's voluntary, but if you keep doing something, if you keep reinforcing something positive, a child will get that as a positive operant, which then will lead to a certain kind of behavior. Then there's punishment, which can be, again, adding something unpleasant or removing something desired. But at this time, there was a view that consciousness and unobservable mental processes are not considered worthy of study by psychologists. This is in the leading textbook on cognitive psychology at the time by Goldstein. There was this view: consciousness and unobserved mental processes are not considered worthy. And at the same time, in 1966, a famous neuroscientist by the name of Eccles wrote, "Neuroscientists have no need for the existence of consciousness." So it's really about simply observing behaviors, past and present behaviors, that matter. And this idea of mental phenomena is not important. Then we get to stage two, which is really ushered in by the Nobel Prize winner Roger Sperry, who introduced this idea of top-down mentalism. The idea that our perceptions, cognition, and reasoning are very influential in determining human behavior. And in fact, are at the top of the brain's hierarchy of actions that determine human behavior. So you see here sort of a whole system where there's a bottom-up process of input from the environment and effect on the parts of the human body and the components of the mind. But then at the same time, you also have cognitive processes in the mind that drive down cognitive regulation. In stage three, we start seeing, and this is by now we're already in 1999, when Martin Seligman was the president of the American Psychology Association. He really began introducing this notion of prospective psychology, and also linked to positive organizational scholarship, which emphasized positive deviance rather than only studying things like the pathologies of the mind or the diseases of the body. And here we start seeing a greater interest. And again, Seligman was a leading clinical psychologist and did a lot of clinical studies to show that the mental representation and evaluation of possible futures drives human behavior. that was 3A, stage 3. 3B, I call, is prospective organizing. So here, instead of looking at the individual, we look at the organization and system. And actually, Cooperrider, and in his PhD study in 1985 at Case Western, already laid the groundwork for this, talking about organizations as products of the affirmative mind. The idea is that leaders nourish the appreciative soil from which new and better guiding images grow on a collective and dynamic basis. Leaders nourish the appreciative soil from which new and better guiding images grow on a collective and dynamic. So here he's very clear, Cooperrider is very clear about the role of guiding images that we have about the future as being the force that drives who we are today. And in the appreciative inquiry 4D cycle, there's the first piece, which is around discovering the best of what is. And then we move to envisioning, which is the dream phase, which is what could be. And that drives then trying to, in a way, close the gap between the best of what could be and the best of what is, allows you to get into the I wish I could move this bar here. Here we go. Into the third phase of design, which is closing the gap between dream and discovery to co-construct what should be. Okay, so this is pretty much how we see, just to summarize again, let me stop this so I can just say this more in a direct dialogue with you, that the whole idea of consciousness as having a role in human behavior was, first of all, was very popular during Greek times. And I think also in Vedic times. So it was in Aristotle, it was in Seneca in the 1st century AD. And it was also popular at the beginning of the 20th century, but then positivist materialist science basically wanted to squash it because we needed to explain everything simply in terms of material science. And it's only more recently that there's been a resurgence in not only the interest in mental cognition and the power of thinking about the future, but also in what is consciousness. So starting in the 1980s, you had the physicalist school that was led by John Bennett. And then you had this panpsychic school that was led by David Chalmers that saw consciousness as a property of the universe. But all of this was coming together to say consciousness is in fact a feature of our world in a way that's as fundamental as the material world we see. We don't see consciousness, but it plays as big a role as the material world that we do see. So where am I going with this? So basically we get to a point where Seligman and Cooperrider have really introduced perspection and perspective theorizing in a big way. But now I want to turn to the quantum science. And I'm sorry, I don't know how else to say this, but be ready to have your minds blown away. Because, well, you know, as one of the quantum physicists said about 30, 40 years ago, if you think you understand quantum physics, then you probably don't. And I don't know what that says about me, because I will do my best to give you some insights into it. But it is a very weird and different way of looking at the world. Okay? So let's look at the quantum lens. In the quantum lens, human behavior is guided by our consciousness of an interconnected, dynamically coherent whole or wholeness. Yes, one of the famous quantum physicists of the 20th century, Erwin Schrödinger, said, "Quantum physics thus reveals a basic oneness of the universe." Quantum physics thus reveals a basic oneness of the universe. Now, what that means is that, again, I'm just going to stop very momentarily here just to say, look, we know that we are influenced by science in our everyday life, but we don't see it. It's because it's almost like, you know, the analogy of a fish in water. You have to jump out of the water to see the water, or to see the water that's swimming in. And in similar ways, you know, Kitchener and Kuhn and others have made the case that we are deeply influenced by the assumptions of science. What I want to do now is show you a comparison of the main assumptions between Western science for the last 300 years and quantum science as it's starting to emerge today. And the reason I'm doing this is because when we start understanding that reality may actually look more like what quantum science is telling us, it completely changes our ideas about the future, about our connection to other people, our connection to nature, our connection to future generations, and to the transcendent. So I'm going to compare very briefly here the ontology of classical science, the Newtonian, Cartesian, Laplacian, Jevonian science of the last 300 years to quantum science. And nothing what I'm saying here is particularly controversial. It's all, you know, quantum physics is one of the most proven sciences out there today. There's nothing speculative about it at all. So in the classical world, the universe is reducible to particles and forces that govern their interaction. So we live in this world where everything comes down to particles. There are five fundamental particles today, you know, electrons, photons, up quarks, down quarks, and muons. And there are four forces: the gravity, electromagnetic, and strong and weak nuclear forces. And that's it. And when you understand how those particles interact, then you understand everything in the classical model. In the quantum world, the universe is an interconnected whole composed of vibrational fields of energy, completely different. An interconnected whole composed of vibrational fields of energy. In the classical world, objects as well as living beings have independent identities that are separated in space and time. And that's true all the way through Einstein's general relativity as well. Whereas in the quantum world, objects are, as well as living beings, are non-locally entangled. That's a hard idea to get. But basically it means that if I feel connected to you, Catherine, in New Zealand, I don't mean just metaphorically, as I feel connected to you because, you know, I feel we're close colleagues, but that we may actually be connected in energy and information terms. If we look at physical processes in the classical model, they're materialistic and deterministic. There's cause and effect is clear. In the quantum model, physical and mental processes co-arise. They interdependently co-arise. That's the idea from the double slit experiment and the Bell theorem experiment, that the observer collapses a probability of something into an actuality, collapse a wave function of light, for example, into particles. Or it can determine the position of an electron in a field. It depends on how we observe it. And then lastly, in the classical ontology, consciousness is simply a product of, you know, the neurons and firing of the neurons and the neurochemical processes of our systems. Whereas in the quantum world, consciousness is seen as coextensive with matter, i.e. it exists outside the brain. And I just would like to remind you, this is not some new age stuff, okay? Like one of the most famous quantum physicists of the last 100 years, David Bohm, in 1980, in his famous article, Wholeness and the Implicate Order, stated very clearly, consciousness is coextensive with matter. And more recently, Tony Nader, a Harvard-trained neurophysiologist at Maharishi University of Management, published a book in which he brings together the sciences and spirituality to make equally a compelling case. So this new science of quantum science is actually converging on ideas that are thousands of years old from spiritual traditions, from indigenous traditions. In Africa, the notion of Ubuntu, I am because we are. In the Lakota Native American view of all my relatives, that animals and trees and plants are in fact our relatives, and that we can interchange and go into their bodies and they can go into our bodies. The Eastern Taoist idea that the goal of life is to become one with the Tao, which again is the way that is somehow an ineffable force, dynamic force from which manifest reality comes. The Buddha, the same thing. He who experiences the unity of life sees his own self in all beings, and all beings in his own self. And then the Advaita Vedanta, which is covered by this here, the essential teachings of the Vedanta, but it's the Advaita, the oneness Vedanta, that again has similar views of oneness. So again, the point of sharing this with you is that, isn't it time as scholars that we recognize that our science, the science that we bring in scholarship, should recognize the long-standing insights from spiritual traditions that have come to conclusions about the nature of reality that now new science is in essence confirming. So some of the implications for social science is that the world is a machine subject to physical laws devoid of meaning. That's kind of the story of the last 300 years. By comparison, in the social sciences, I think when you combine, quantum physics, connectedness, interconnectedness, and wholeness with the spiritual traditions, we see ourselves as spirit-infused beings in a world that is alive with meaning. Humans are not essentially separate and selfish. They are essentially caring and compassionate. That actually comes now from this new reinforced integration of new science and ancient spirituality. Instead of seeing ourselves as driven to compete, this neo-Darwinist idea, survival of the fittest, and John Stuart Mill, maximizing utility, we should see ourselves as striving to flourish, living life to its fullest, which, by the way, is what we observe in nature and how ecologies grow and develop. Nature exists as a resource for human consumption, another idea from the last 300 years. Now we need to go back to seeing ourselves as an integral part of nature, which probably was the way human beings saw themselves for tens of thousands of years up until the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And then here, reality exists independently of our observation of it. And in the quantum paradigm, we co-create the world through our observation of it. So we now will go to breakout session 2, and this breakout session is really around 4 questions. Paul will put these into the chat again, but I just want to go through them and also check if there are any questions about these. Please take yourself off mute and ask, or if you want to make comments before we get into it, because I think we're actually on good time. We're not late. We're actually probably a little early. So the first question for this next breakout session is, viewed through a quantum lens, in what ways does the following MSR statement take on fresh meaning? So that sounds like it's a bit of a complicated question, but there was a statement in a pretty high visibility journal article in the Journal of Management, Spirituality, and Religion, stating that matters of ontology, epistemology, and methodology inevitably inform and affect our research right from the start and help constitute MSR as a unique field of inquiry within the Academy of Management. So if that's true, then how does viewed through a quantum lens and perspective theorizing viewed through a quantum lens, how would you bring that into this question about MSR, so unique field of inquiry? The second question is, should research be viewed as responsible for creating the reality it studies? Remember, in the quantum paradigm, the observer does not discover an objective reality. The observer participates in collapsing a potential reality into a manifest reality through the act of observation. And third, what does perspective theorizing imply for MSR scholarship aimed at wicked problems such as climate change, social equity, and racial injustice? Okay, thank you for your patience, and I really look forward to looking at all these. Oh, thank you, Paul, for putting those in here. I look forward to hearing how the breakout groups go, and I hope you'll be able to address choose one of these. This is to choose one of the 4 questions. It's not for you in 10 minutes to try to tackle all 4 questions. You'll be relieved to hear.
Off we go.
Series, and I went to the literature, and most of the leadership theories were written by white men, and I did not see my personal experience in the theory, and I had a cognitive dissonance that actually broke, and I realized I needed to count on my experience as the scholar leader as an input to the theory building, and that's what changed my perspective of my neutral observer self. So who is at the table? What voices are there? And I just think that matters somehow, and I don't know where it all fits. Just wanted to make that comment.
Wonderful, Julia. As always, you're such a wonderful scholar and colleague on these topics. I look forward to continuing to work with you. Anyone else? Any other thoughts, please?
Well, I got my hand up, so I guess I'll talk. This is Jim.
I don't see the hands up, Jim. Go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, I'm really excited about what's happening, I see an opportunity for MSR to be involved in an inquiry throughout the academy. I think in a lot of the divisions, the concerns you express are well grounded and well accepted, that we know things aren't working very well. But the academy, we can honor the academy has based its work on our best understanding of science. And we work hard at that. Now, what you've offered and other people have offered, I believe, is the possibility of saying, yeah, we're science driven, but oops, the science is different now. Now, if we're going to continue to be science driven, then let's look at what the new science is saying to us, and what does that imply about what we want to do and how we're doing it. Particularly for many of us, the reality that we don't take responsibility for the world that our words are creating all the time. And that we could engage in a humble inquiry throughout the academy that's kind of jujitsu. Okay, we're science driven. Here's the science. It's different. And so maybe it takes us a different place now. Where do we want to go? Does that make any sense?
Love it. Absolutely love it. It's jujitsu at its most elevated and refined level. Good thinking.
By the way, it's easy to say humble inquiry because I sure as heck don't understand quantum science, and I've read your book.
So I would like to speak into this from the perspective of Chris. I appreciated your comment in your quantum leadership book about we are past the cognitive analytical aspect of leadership development and training, and are moving more toward an embodied way of bringing that development around. And so from a theory perspective, and I suppose I speak more from a scholar practitioner lens, how are we taking these things and how can we move through this perspection lens and really embody and engage leaders in some embodied practices that are connecting leadership theories, leadership practices, leadership skills with these more embodied spiritual kinds of experiences to help elevate their consciousness, and in what way are we doing that, and then how might we ground the theory from there to bring it into the world. So asking these inquiry questions, right, but then also doing some more embodied kind of research and then pulling from that to see what comes forth. And that's really where I'm interested in, how we can bring that kind of work, that kind of theory into the academy and into this world.
Thank you so much, Nancy. That's great. Yeah, absolutely. Stacy, you have your hand up. Stacy here.
Thank you. Yeah, I just thought the whole idea of prospective theorizing is calling us to embrace that scholar practitioner role that Nancy was just claiming, and to do so with the rigor of our scientific training. And I think that one of the things that I really appreciated in our breakout group was being reminded of the both and, that we can't just embrace quantum and forget Newtonian, because if you don't respect gravity, you're not long for this world. So I really think as scholar practitioners, one of the most powerful ways we can do that is by bringing it into our immediate practice, how we treat our colleagues in our departments, in our universities, how we treat our colleagues when we're reviewing their papers or listening to their presentations, or all those things. I am reminded this morning about a fairly dysfunctional economics department that, as the dean's office, we're just allowing to play really rotten games instead of getting everyone in the room and saying, hey, let's talk about what's going on here. Let's talk about the relationships, and let's talk about, like, it's that basic stuff that as intellectuals too often we want to play in this heady idea space. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Stacy. You know, that's such an important point, and I forget it. I forget to mention it, but it is absolutely true. It reminds me that, you know, when we say that we have to make a positive impact in business, it doesn't mean that doing less harm should be forgotten. Doing less harm is still important. It's the lower rungs on the ladder to sustainability. And so I think you're reminding us that we need to still have both the classical science and yeah, absolutely. Vikram and then Anil. And then I think after that, we may have to turn it over to Judy.
Thanks, Chris. So I think I feel that personally, I come from a strong practitioner view, because being in business all my life and academia is new for me. I think we are at the cusp of starting a consciousness-based management revolution at the same place where in the 60s, quality management became the buzzword in management. So I consider 2021 as literally 1960s from a quality to a consciousness perspective. And MSR has a potential to become that linchpin, that change agent to help that happen. But two things have to happen before that can actually happen, in my personal humble view. is one that we cannot be at the fringes. We have to tackle some of the hard management issues that businesses face, number one. And number two, we can't be thinking of burning down the edifice, which tends to become a conversation sometimes that everything is broken, the whole shareholder ownership is, those kind of conversations. How do we make businesses more efficient? How do we make businesses better? At the same time, not compromise any of the goals that a consciousness-based thinking brings about. So if we could do these two things of not being on the fringes and still being able to provide value creation levers to the business, I think the future is very bright in terms of consciousness becoming the linchpin for the future from an active business management perspective.
And notice, I think, how that's consistent with the quantum perspective, which is it's not A or B, it's A and B that are part of the collective interaction.
Thank you, Vikram. I'm taking notes, and I'm going to digest all these brilliant ideas after this. Anil.
Yes, thank you. And Paul, while I talk, if you could enable me to share for a moment, I would love to share one page. So I think this is like Vikram said, and we are holding a conference on consciousness-based leadership and management. Chris is on the advisory board, Judy is, and Catherine is, and our conference co-chair is Dr. Dennis Heaton. He is on, and many of you are presenting, and Jerry Bieberman is presenting. So these are the kind of questions we're addressing. And what we have found is that when we've been as a school focused on the consciousness-based view for 50 years before it was nearly as acceptable. And so we welcome you all to join and listen in. It's a little late to present. Georgia is presenting there. I'm just looking at some names that's just coming up. So we would love to have you join, and then participate in discussions, ask questions, whatever it is. But this is that's a forum. It's a 3-day forum, May 21st to 23rd. We would love to have you there. And I would like to facilitate your participation at any deeper levels as you wish. I just wanted to share for a moment the screen of the thing and how you could register very simply. Paul, do I have ability to share?
You should be able to share. You should be able to share, Anil. Go ahead.
It's not allowing me, it says to host it. Okay, now I can. So here is the conference site. It says mapping the path to a flourishing humanity, and it is indeed talking about convergence of the quantum/material with the ancient and the spiritual, etc. And we're talking about the world being a huge family. It is sponsored by MSR, and so that's a very big deal. Conscience Conference is free, and if you click here, actually it'll take you to this Eventbrite page, and you could actually just register for free right here, and then we will have access to all the events. So this is a
great. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Neil. I just want to make sure we end on time. Sorry for cutting you short. I want to say one more thing along the same idea. Sandra Waddock does an extraordinary series of interviews, and she has one next Friday, April 30th at noon with Andy Hoffman, who's one of the scholars I quoted as being highly critical of the academy theorizing as it's currently done. Sandra, I don't know if you want to say 15 seconds about it.
Yeah, it's part of the Intellectual Shamans series through the International Humanistic Management Association, and there will be further announcements, I think, coming up in some of the Academy listservs. I'm pretty sure MSR gets them, so please sign up. Andy's a great person to listen to. He's just published 2 books.
Yeah, well worth going to that game, Friday, April 30th. Thank you, and over to you, Judy.
And on the way, I've dropped in the chat. If you're interested in a recording of this session, you can put your email address in the chat. If you're not comfortable with that, Chris's email address is in there, and you can email him and he'll send you a copy. Judy.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everybody for being here. I want to thank the Flamekeepers for being here. The Flamekeepers are the elders of MSR who were around at the founding. And so we do a series of big question webinars. Richard Paraguay, Lee Robbins, Jerry Bieberman, Yochanan Altman, Catherine Pavlovich, and I'm forgetting, well, Chris, of course, is a member of that. And am I forgetting somebody else? Anyway, I think that's it. And I put in the chat just the things I'm going to give you quick notes about. There's a Fetzer Scholarship for doctoral students and new faculty that is being offered through Fetzer Institute to pay for registration to the Academy and your membership this year. And the deadline for applying for that is April 30th. And if you want to, I'll put my email in the chat. If you want to see the call, oops, that's not the chat. Sorry, here we go. I'm Judy at edgewalkers.org. You can email me. If you're a member of MSR, it's been, sorry, I can't talk and type at the same time. Let me do this. If you're a member of MSR, there's lots of announcements already about that. And we have a number of Fetzer scholars with us on this call. It's a wonderful community of young scholars, and we're glad you're all here. Claudia, I see, Georgia, a number of you that are, Toyoko, a number of you have been very active and continue to be, Susan. The Fetzer Scholarship needs to be applied for by April 30th. There's an online link that I will send you. Also at the same deadline is the MSR Promising Dissertation Proposal Award. So if you are writing your dissertation proposal, you're in the early stages of that, or you're in the early stages of collecting your data for your proposal, for your research, and if it's on an MSR topic, there is a cash award to support your research, and I can send you information. Again, email me at judy@edgewalkers.org. So that deadline is April 30th. More events coming up from the MSR Research Collaborative. There's going to be a mentoring town hall on May 4th. And again, MSR, we've posted that on the MSR Connect. And I've posted it in the Edgewalker letter for those of you part of my Edgewalker community. And that is to set up to create a mentoringship program for co-mentoring, because those of us who might be in a typical mentoring level of our careers also have so much to learn from people who are earlier in their careers, who are top of the literature, who also know technology. There's just a lot to be shared. So we want to create that program. There is an MSR retreat that is happening June 23rd through 25th. The cost for that is $25 or $50. You decide what works for you. And we can send you information about that if you're not on MSR Connect. And then the research colloquium that is sponsored also by this group is 2 days of in-depth conversation about research methodologies and research topics and how we support each other and getting published and all these kinds of ideas from in the field of management, spirituality, and religion. That's July 26th through 27th. A number of wonderful speakers, and it's 24 hours around the world, making it available to everyone. And the last announcement is our next Big Question webinar is September 16th with Catherine Pavlovich, who is here with us today as one of the Flamekeepers. Wave your hand, Catherine, for those who can see you on the screen. And her provocative topic, we always like to ask big questions, is what is God? So that's going to be another powerful, meaningful conversation. I think that's it for me. I'm just so delighted to have been participating in this today. Chris, thank you. You always blow our minds, and we need that, and we need you. So thank you so much for all you give and share and discover and explore and question. I'll turn it back for you for closing comments.
Well, thank you, Judy. I've saved all of the chat, and I'm looking forward to going through it. I hope we'll be in touch either in person or over the internet or through the quantum field, one way or another. Stay in touch then, and looking forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you all.